You are about to listen to a conversation with John D. Williams, the CEO of Domtar. It's a 6,500 person paper, pulp, and packaging products company. And John is one of the over 100 CEOs that I interviewed for my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, which you can learn more about by going to leadwithvulnerability.com. You can get a copy for yourself and your team. As usual, these conversations are unscripted, they are candid, and everything that John is going to share during this conversation is completely coming from his insights, his experiences, his heart. So I really, really love these conversations with these CEOs. If you want to hear more from CEOs like John and the over 100 other CEOs, you can grab a copy of the book. Again, that is leadwithvulnerability.com. We're also going to be releasing more of these podcast episodes in the coming weeks and months. So to get access to all of those when they come out, head over to greatleadership.substack.com. Again, that's greatleadership.substack.com. I hope you enjoy this episode with John Williams. Hello, everyone. My guest today is John Williams, the CEO and president of Domtar. John, thank you for joining me.
You're more than welcome.
So very, very excited to talk to you. Our conversation today, of course, is going to be about vulnerability and leadership and stuff like that. But very first question for you is, when you hear vulnerability, you were telling me that you actually had to look it up in Webster's. So what does vulnerability mean to you? What did you find when you started looking this stuff up?
Well, I think the dictionary definition is, I'll read it quietly because I wrote it down: capable of being physically or emotionally wounded.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying.
So it does sound rather worrying. So I guess what it means to me in a sort of business context is, I think, partly the ability to show empathy, which is a challenge sometimes, I think, to all of us, and also to be prepared to openly discuss your weaknesses. So, what you're not good at, and there are plenty of things CEOs are not good at, and also to have the confidence, I think, to allow the team to know that.
Yep.
And therefore kind of, fill in the gaps where I always say between myself and my CFO, we're almost a complete human being because, we kind of complement each other. So one's always looking for that in a team.
Yeah.
I think also, actually, one should not be afraid of letting people know what upsets you emotionally, what upsets you emotionally, either externally or internally. I find, in a world of sort of political correctness, dare I say it, that a lot of us kind of silence ourselves on our real feelings. And, everybody tells you in relationships, and, being a CEO is only about a series of relationships, that it's kind of toxic to internalize things. So I think sometimes the need to externalize those in a kind of safe place with people who understand you is incredibly important, actually.
Yeah. And also, I forgot to ask, just for some context, for people not familiar with the company, tell us a little bit about what you guys do and how many employees you have.
Certainly. So we've got 6,500 people. We're a pulp and paper business. So we had been a public company for many years. We've just been taken private by a Canadian company. So we're off the public markets. We'd been on the public markets for quite some time, both in Canada, actually, and in the United States. As we were saying earlier, we've been in business about 175 years. So we make pulp, which ends up in things like baby diapers and adult diapers and tissue products, all the big tissue brands and diaper brands people are buying. And we make what we call uncoated free sheets. So the kind of paper that you would put in your printer at work or at home, as well as a whole raft of papers that make labels and make all kinds of things. So we have 13 paper mills pulp and paper mills across the United States.
Yeah.
So that's us.
Well, so when you think about that as a company, vulnerability doesn't strike me as right? It seems like a more conservative kind of like manufacturing, like on the floor, not really talking about feelings or emotions or asking for help, kind of like tough environment. Would you say that there is vulnerability does play a role even in that kind of an environment?
Well, so I think so. Let me tell you why. Because I think whatever you do, it's about managing teams, right? I mean, I always say to people, anybody can buy the assets. Who the customers are is pretty obvious, right? I mean, there's no great insight into who our major customers are across the business. So the only differentiator is people. And the only differentiator then becomes how you manage those people and motivate those people. That's true if I'm a software engineer, when I'm making rockets, whatever it might be. So I think, quite frankly, admitting when you don't know, let's say that's a pretty simplistic definition of vulnerability. So being able to say, what are we going to do next? Because I need some help to work out what we're going to do next. What are we going to do about a problem? Because I need help to work out what we're going to do about the problem. I think applies all the way through a business, actually. A very good example. We're obsessed, of course, because we run an industrial business, with health and safety.
Yeah.
We believe very strongly everybody has a right to come to work and leave safely, but they also have a responsibility. Now, you reach a point when you're really good at this stuff, all the issues around safety become behavioral. They don't become, let's put a barrier up here and let's tie. It's actually behavioral stuff, and that
Yeah.
behavioral stuff is often around how are we going to do this together. We don't have all the answers, and I think just saying that is
Hmm.
the beginnings of having a discussion about the fact, we're not all seeing, all knowing, and we're going to have one huge brain in the corner which tells how all the baby brains what to do. That is not how businesses are organized these days, thank God.
Yeah.
So, quite frankly, more and more, to really get to kind of root cause solutions, you have to have processes where you admit you don't know the answer when you start.
Yeah.
And I think for CEOs, that is sometimes rather difficult because there is an expectation. I think particularly in the United States, as you can tell, I'm not Carolina born by the accent. Um, that the CEO is this all-seeing, all-knowing kind of uber guru who only has to speak the word, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's brilliant." That's not the world we live in anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are huge challenges that one person is a fool to try and solve it. Come up with all the answers, in my view.
Can you share a time when you had to be vulnerable at work?
Oh, I can tell you a million times. Yes. So,
I love stories. Any
um,
stories, people love hearing those.
yeah, and you want the battle cry stories here. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I had some personal challenges in my life, which I imagined I was not bringing to the workplace. And I got some feedback actually from this is many years ago, from my then chief financial officer. He said, John, you're not getting this right, mate. You're just not. Go away and sort yourself out, and then come back. And so that was an interesting lesson. And I could always tell because he always spoke in the third person when he was really telling me off. So he'd go, John is really not doing this well, which was a sure sign that I was kind of in trouble as far as he saw it. So that was one instance. I think also, the time when a major customer, perhaps years ago, sat me down and said, look, we're leaving you. We're done. We've had enough of you and the business. I can remember several instances where that happened. And, your stomach goes cold. You're just rooted to the spot. You're thinking, oh my God, this is a huge chunk of the company's business. And I've got to go back and tell them that, and that's tough stuff, actually. Now, when I first started work, I started as a salesman for a company called Pedigree Pet Foods, which is a division of the Mars Corporation. So, M&M, Snickers
Yep.
bars, all those things, a completely fabulous and great business, which I admire to this day. But I can remember, so I was this university graduate, thought I knew it all, and I was calling on retailers in South London. And I mean, some of these store managers scared the living daylights out of me. I mean, I thought I was, and they would never use my name. It was Oi. You know, that was my name as far as they were concerned. So I think there are many occasions where I've felt sort of emotionally, oh my gosh, this is tougher stuff than I ever thought it was going to be in my business life. And maybe the numbers have been horrible versus expectation, the end of the month and the numbers are just ghastly.
Yeah.
Those are vulnerable moments, I think. And you've got a decision to make. Do you suck it up or do you sit there with somebody you trust in the business and talk about how you feel about it?
Maybe we could talk about, if you're okay with talking about it, at least.
Sure.
So you mentioned the first story, kind of like you were going through something personal. Are you able to give a little bit of context around what was going on?
Yeah, sure. So I went through a really messy divorce many, many years ago. My wife and I have been together 30 odd years now. We met in 1989, but in sort of 87, 88, I had two young kids. I felt like the lowest form of life in the universe. Um, having to kind of make myself turn around, do the work whilst my personal life was in chaos was hard, to be honest.
Yeah.
And of course, my management team knew what was going on. My secretary knew what was going on. So just having them understand was very helpful, actually.
Yeah.
Whereas, the temptation is always just to suck it up and wait till somebody asks you a question.
Where were you working at that point?
I was working in the UK. I was working for a headhunter for a while, which I was not very good at. And I got my first kind of really good senior managing director's role. So I was working in the packaging business, and I was working actually for a division of a US company, and I was working for the CEO of the group business, if you like. And it was challenging, no question about it. I mean, in the end, I met the woman I love, and I was fine. But
Yeah.
it was a tricky time.
So where did the vulnerability come in? Was it because you had to share and talk about that at work?
Well, you've got a choice. Yeah, that's a great question. You've got a choice, haven't you? You can either just, stonewall it and pretend it's all tickety-boo, or you can find people who you trust to discuss the fact that you're actually going through hell. But at the same time, you have to face front and run the company. And I chose to do that, actually. I chose to talk about it with a couple of people I really trusted in my management team. They all understood what was happening, and I felt considerably better because of it.
So you found a couple people to trust, which I think is an important thing. Okay. And what did you find the impact of that was? Like when you shared and you were vulnerable and you said,
well, now
guys,
that's a really interesting question. So I had a chief financial officer called David Stead, who I adore to this day. He retired when the business got sold. And he just listened and, empathized and understood. And and I had a sales and marketing director, Mark Johnson, who was the same. And that was just very helpful to be kind of, I hate to use jargon. You end up using kind of psychobabble when you have this kind of conversation. One has to be careful that one doesn't. But, you end up being seen and actually realizing that being seen is not this massive risk that you imagine it is in a business context. If you have a strong relationship with these people, and let's be honest, we're working 12 hours a day, God knows how many days a week. We're traveling with each other. We were all over Europe all the time. We were buying businesses. So these people so well.
Yeah.
I mean, they're almost closer to you than anyone other than, your spouse and your children. So you can feel, I think, comfortable having that conversation with them. And they were nothing but supportive, quite frankly. So that, kind of felt good when your life was in chaos.
Yeah, you bring up something interesting, which is there's not that big risk of being seen. I feel like a lot of people are scared of being seen, especially leaders, but even employees across the board.
Well, Jacob, what an interesting thought. I mean, I'm long enough in the tooth that the politically correct discourse that we are now all having to be involved in, I think, really sometimes distances us from each other, if I'm being truthful. Because can we really say what we feel and what we think, or are we going to get sued? Is the whistleblower system going to roar into life because we said the wrong thing, or we
cancel culture comes up a lot.
Yeah, and I think Now, I'm not saying we let it all rip and go back to the 60s. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Um, but I do find I find the genuine interaction where teams kind of really know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and I know my weaknesses. I mean, I'm 68 years old. Of course, I know what I'm not good at. My team know it too. So they always laugh at me that when they present to me, they know they'll never get to the end of the presentation, and they know they'll never show me because I'll leap to page 26 because that's what interests me. And it is actually, truthfully, a joke between us all. Um, but I think that's what makes it interesting because they also know
Yeah.
that I'll fight their corner,
Hmm.
and I know they'll fight my corner. So, and I think that's how I've done this job. I've been in this job since January 2009, so I've been a CEO quite a long time. Um, I think that's what creates a culture:
Yeah.
treating people respectfully and showing actually that you do care when somebody walks into your office and tells you, I don't know, something, a child is sick or a parent has died or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you simply have to take the time to empathize. So if you don't, they've got other choices.
Would you say even now as CEO, like you practice some sense of vulnerability on a regular basis?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's conscious. I think maybe it's just me, to be frank.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just needy. I don't know. I mean, I think you it's a very interesting thing what happens. So one, I'm a Christian. So obviously I immediately think about that aspect of things, right? And I immediately think about, is this person hurting for whatever reason? And all of us have our challenges in life. People die on us, children get hurt, all sorts of horrible things happen. So I
Yeah.
think authenticity is incredibly important as a CEO. So if you're trying to fake it,
People will know.
fake it, they know. So that, I had a wonderful boss for a while who was obviously told, look, you've got to be more interested in your people. So he'd call you up and goes, how's your family? And I go, fine, right. And then he'd talk about, what was going on in the business. So you've got to find, and I think as the CEO, you can do it actually. You've got to carve out the time that when somebody walks into the office in real trouble, and it's happened, maybe they've had some terrible diagnosis or, their spouse has had some terrible, I mean, you just have to sit and listen. I mean,
Yeah.
you owe these people that right. I'm giving you very long-winded answers to your simple questions. I think the other challenge for corporate America is once upon a time, this was a job for life, and that was kind of the contract, right? We gave you health care and we gave you a good defined benefit pension and we did all that. We don't do that anymore.
Yep.
Or if we do, it's at vastly reduced levels of commitment. So keeping people through the long term to make sure you hold on to the skills that you've built is incredibly important because they've all got. I mean, I think one has to remember they've all got choices every day, and the better
Yeah.
they are, the more choices they have.
Yep. Yep.
So creating a culture where they feel valued is critical, and actually, I believe being a real person with them
Yeah.
is part of that mix, if you like, that creates loyalty. And to my mind, that's incredibly important.
Would you say that you've always been this type of a more authentic, vulnerable person, or did it
No,
take that divorce to make it?
no, no. That started it because I was a complete twit. Um, but no, I would say where it's amazing how interesting this discussion can become. So what do you have to do to, climb the greasy pole up to the CEO, the corner office, call it what you
Yeah.
will? So you have to do a couple of things. You have to work out the behavior that's rewarded and the behavior that's punished in whatever culture you're in. All corporations have their own specific culture. You have to know who's dangerous, I guess I would say, and who's not. and you have to know who the key influencers are, who can either mentor you or, do you in terms of how you progress up a structure. And it sounds egotistical. I've always been very good at that. I can work that out. It's like children in the playground. Who's going to beat you up? So, and I've always been good at that. I went to an all boys private school, and if you weren't good at that, you just spent 13 weeks of misery away from mum and dad. So I've been good at that stuff. Now, then when you get to run a business, you find yourself in the unique part of this role, which is, I think, quite attractive, is that you can then build a culture that you hold dear. Interestingly, you very often build a completely different culture to the ones you grew up in, because I'm old enough to remember working for some complete swines who treated you like filth. And, if you didn't take the next promotion, you were redlined and never, you were just never heard of again. So when I started to run the Domtar business in January 2009, if you think about that, the teeth of the Great Recession, I really wanted to show people they were valued, whether they were the receptionist, whoever they were. I was just going to go and say thank you for what you're doing, which I did. And every time I went around a paper mill, I said thank you, and I meant it, because I value these people very highly, and they know that. So what does that mean? It's kind of interesting. Average staff turnover in a industrial company is probably 15%. Ours is 5%. So we have a very low turnover of people. We hold on to people. Once we've got you, we're inclined to have you for life. And I'm convinced part of that is that we run this very respectful, but at the same time authentic culture where people know they're valued. And if you do that, you can reap unbelievable benefits, even in, what is, to your point. I mean, I thought you said it interesting, a kind of a mucky business, industrial process with huge assets, but people still want to be valued.
Yeah.
I think that's the secret sauce, to be honest.
So you were not always like this. Would you say you were more of like a command and control, do what I say kind of?
What an interesting. No, I was sort of chameleon-like, I would say. So if we're not careful here, you and I are going to end up talking about my mother, which probably won't be much help to you. But if you think about, so at the age of 8, I went to an all-boys boarding school. So I was not at home for 13 weeks at a stretch at the age of 8, which is what the British middle class do to their children. Thank God they don't do it anymore, but they did in my day. Now, this is dinosaurs ruled the earth, right? So, pre everything, really. Not quite pre-TV, but not far off. And so there you were in this completely alien environment where you had to learn the rules of the game pretty fast, actually. Or you were the isolated kid. You were the kid nobody talked to, or the kid people beat up. So you very quickly learned a series of behaviors that would allow you to, quite frankly, survive. I'm not sure if thrive is a word I'd use, but certainly so. So you had to play sport. You had to do all that stuff. So when you join a corporation, as I was saying to you earlier, you become incredibly good at adopting the successful behaviors. And so if you're in a culture that's kind of dog eat dog, you eat dog. If you're in something that looks a little bit more kind of, how would I put it, soft and squishy, you're soft and squishy. So I would never underestimate human beings' ability to adapt. And I think that's what allows you to, I think if you talk to a lot of CEOs, they may not tell you this stuff, but maybe they will. That's what they're good at, right? Yes, of course you have to achieve, right? You got to get the job done, but lots of people can get the job done and they don't become chief executive officers. So what is it? I think it's partly understanding culture, partly understanding how you move forward in an organization. I can remember a moment at Mars where I had to present. So I was a lowly salesman, in a 600 salespeople. I mean, how was I going to differentiate myself? And the sales director, so the sales vice president, turned up one day to a sort of meeting where 7 of us And he suddenly turned to me and said, "John, sell me this product." I can remember it to this day. And I thought, I've got 5 minutes here that I'm going to make or break myself. So I gave it my all. And within 8 weeks, I was promoted to run most of New England for them. So
Wow.
I think the other thing you've got to do is you've got to know the moment that matters,
Yeah.
because they'll come along. Anyway,
Um,
I took you miles off the vulnerability point, but I think that's what happens.
well, it's interesting you mentioned your mom. I'm assuming she shaped.
You can't do this to me, Jacob. It's unfair. Yeah, go on, carry on.
No, I was gonna say I'm assuming she shaped kind of your personality, your leadership style, how you approach some of these things too.
She shaped it in a way of knowing what not to do,
Hmm.
because I think there are certain people, and I loved her dearly, and she's long passed, and God rest her, but she was tricky. And the beat of the household operated to her emotional state. Shall I put it in those
Yeah.
terms? Let's keep it as simple as that. So the temptation as a child of that environment is to hide. I would say the person I have to thank that I don't do that anymore is my wife,
Hmm.
who, came and kind of who digs me out. Who'll say to me,
Yeah.
"So how are you feeling?" Yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, you know what men are like. We're like rabbits caught in the headlights when we get asked that question, aren't we? I mean,
Yeah.
talk about vulnerable. At that point we go, "Oh, how do I get out of here?"
Yeah.
So she's the person I think one has to thank. And also, quite frankly, as you emerge, the feedback's always positive if you actually care about people.
Hmm.
And I think in all the sort of not-for-profit stuff I do, which I do quite a bit, um, the sense of self-worth you get from helping,
Yeah.
people who are vulnerable in all kinds of ways, from health standpoint or mental health standpoint or physically, it's only good for yourself. So
Would you
there
say
you
that a
have it.
lot of people you work with at your company, would they describe you as vulnerable? Like, do you share about yourself, your challenges, your struggles, you're comfortable with?
Yeah, I probably overshare actually. I think sometimes I can sort of see the eyes roll up, thinking Williams is here. He goes again. I would. That's a very interesting question. I would think so. I think what they would say is Williams is pretty fast on his feet in terms of learning. He uses a lot of humor, but you absolutely know when he's displeased. But I'm not attacking them, but they know it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would say if there was a kind of chart of what do they know about you versus what do you know about them, that chart, how much data have they got on you? I would say in most of my relationships in the workplace, they'll know a lot about me, maybe
Hmm.
more than I know about them because I'm actually interested in people, so I'll just go and dig.
Yeah.
So the person may be we have a management meeting at 8:30 every Tuesday morning for an hour and a half or so, just kind of what happened this week, what's going to happen next week. And if someone's in that meeting kind of not quite coming forward, I mean, I'll give them a call and say, "What's up? Tell me."
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed what turns up.
Remember to get access to the second half of this conversation, which is more fascinating and more interesting than the first part, head over to greatleadership.substack.com and you'll be notified as soon as that becomes available. And in the meantime, I hope you decide to pre-order a copy of the book, which you can do at leadwithvulnerability.com. That's leadwithvulnerability.com. And you'll get access to some really amazing and pretty cool bonuses, including an exclusive webinar that I'm going to be hosting, a sneak peek of the book before it becomes available, and also a couple of bonus CEO interviews that we're going to be releasing in the coming weeks. All of that is available, again, at leadwithvulnerability.com. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'll see you next time.